September 2, 1967, 6 miles west of Unheard, Central Highlands, Republic of Vietnam. Specialist 4th Class J.D. Calhoun sat 8th in line, his hands gripping the steering wheel of his 2.5-ton cargo truck as the convoy wound through terrain that made every driver's hands sweat. The diesel engine roared so loud he barely heard it at first. The cracking of small arms fire, distant and sharp. Then he saw it. The truck ahead of him shuddered as bullets punched through its canvas cover like invisible fists. Metal sparked, glass shattered. The reality hit him harder than the recoil of any weapon. They were in the kill zone. 39 trucks stretched along Route 19, emptied of their cargo, returning from Pleiku to Quy Nhon. 2 M151 Jeeps, just 2, armed with 7.62 M60 machine guns, provided the convoy's entire security. Against them, hidden in the tree line so close a driver could reach out and touch the jungle, an entire enemy company waited. 90 men with decades of guerrilla warfare experience, 50 ambush positions, 50 11mm recoilless rifles, IK-40s, rocket-propelled grenades, hand grenades. The mathematics of destruction were simple and brutal. At 18:55 hours, the ambush erupted. A 50-mm round slammed into the lead jeep, killing 1 man instantly and wounding 2 others. The convoy commander's worst fear materialized in fire and smoke. A 5,000-gallon fuel tanker, struggling to keep pace, had split the convoy in 2. Now both elements were trapped in a 700-meter kill zone. The enemy infantry poured fire into the trucks, canvas covers shredded. Drivers dove for cover alongside the road, scattering like leaves in a hurricane. They tried to return fire with their personal weapons, but they were cargo haulers, not infantry. They were disorganized, outgunned, overwhelmed. In less than 10 minutes, the Viet Cong had destroyed or damaged 34 trucks, killed 7 American soldiers, and wounded 17 more. Helicopters from the 1st Cavalry Division's nearby base arrived 15 minutes later, but by then the enemy had melted back into the jungle, leaving behind burning wreckage and shattered men who had learned a terrible lesson. In Vietnam, driving a truck was not just driving a truck. This was the moment everything changed. What the enemy didn't know, what they couldn't have imagined, was that they had just created their own nightmare. From the ashes of that ambush, American ingenuity would forge a weapon the Pentagon never authorized, never planned, and never expected. Young soldiers, teenagers barely old enough to vote, would transform cargo trucks into rolling fortresses that would become known by names painted in defiant letters. Brutus, Eve of Destruction, The Untouchable, Satisfaction, Cold Sweat, King Cobra. The gun trucks were born not from military doctrine, but from desperation. They were improvised armor and salvaged steel, quad 50 caliber machine guns and miniguns that could spit 6,000 rounds per minute, crews who would drive directly into kill zones while everyone else ran for cover. They weren't supposed to exist, but within months they would transform convoy security forever, influencing tactics used decades later in distant wars. And when the Viet Cong heard that distinctive thunder approaching, they would learn to fear what American soldiers could build when their survival depended on it. This is the story of how laughter turned to terror, how cargo haulers became warriors, how the most feared vehicles in the Central Highlands were created not by engineers in Detroit or generals in the Pentagon, but by kids with welding torches and determination in the mud of Vietnam. The problem began with geography and necessity. By 1967, American combat forces were spread throughout South Vietnam's Central Highlands, like stars scattered across a dark sky. Firebase after firebase, landing zone after landing zone, each requiring constant resupply. Ammunition, fuel, food, medical supplies, replacement parts, everything modern war demanded in quantities that would have staggered generals from previous generations. The coastal ports of Quy Nhon and Cam Ranh Bay became the arteries through which American might flowed into Vietnam. Ships arrived daily, unloading containers by the thousands onto docks that never stopped moving. From there, supplies had to travel inland to bases at Bong Son, An Khê, Pleiku, Da Lat, and Buon Ma Thuot. Helicopters like the ubiquitous Huey and massive C-130 Hercules cargo planes did their part, ferrying critical supplies and personnel. But they couldn't carry everything. They couldn't reach everywhere. The volume was simply too great. So the mission fell to the United States Army Transportation Corps. Young men who had enlisted to drive trucks found themselves operating in one of the most dangerous environments imaginable. The 8th Transportation Group, based in Quy Nhon, bore the heaviest burden. 3 battalions under its command, the 27th, 54th, and 120th, ran convoys along routes that would become legendary for all the wrong reasons. Route 19 was the main artery, 100 miles of crumbling asphalt and packed dirt connecting the coast to the interior. The French had built it in the early 20th century, and it showed. The road had seen better days before World War II. Now, after years of monsoons, military traffic, and deliberate sabotage, it was a nightmare of potholes, washouts, and hairpin turns with no guardrails above 1,000-foot drops. Trucks were lost over the edge regularly, drivers and cargo tumbling into ravines that became mechanical graveyards. The terrain itself seemed designed for ambush. Leaving Quy Nhon, the road ran 35 miles along the coastal plain before beginning its brutal climb into the mountains. The An Khê Pass came first, where the road switched back on itself in a turn drivers called the Devil's Hairpin. Traffic slowed to a crawl, 3 to 4 miles per hour, trucks grinding through gears while the jungle pressed in from both sides, so close you could hear birds calling and smell the vegetation. Further west, beyond the 1st Cavalry Division's base at An Khê, came the Mang Yang Pass, where the road rose again, and potholes a foot deep kept speeds down to 15 miles per hour even on straight stretches. 2 sections of Route 19 became particularly infamous: the Devil's Hairpin in An Khê Pass and Ambush Alley below Mang Yang Pass. Incidents occurred there almost daily. The Vietnamese had been fighting on this ground for generations, against the Japanese, against the French. They knew every ridge, every draw, every piece of dead ground that offered concealment. They knew where trucks had to slow down, where convoys stretched out, where American visibility was worst. On June 24, 1954, during the French Colonial War, the Viet Minh had annihilated Mobile Group 100 along Route 19, just 4 miles from Pleiku. An entire French combat battalion, hundreds of professional soldiers with tanks and artillery, wiped out in a carefully orchestrated ambush. The Americans driving trucks in 1967 didn't know this history, but they learned it quickly, passing the tombstones that marked where French soldiers were buried, white crosses barely visible through the vegetation. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army had studied American tactics carefully. They understood that attacking heavily defended bases was suicide. American firepower, artillery, air support, helicopter gunships could reduce any assault force to shredded meat in minutes. But the supply lines? That was different. Long convoys of thin-skinned trucks spread out over miles, defended by, at most, a few jeeps with machine guns. That was opportunity. Beginning in early 1967, the attacks increased in frequency and ferocity. Snipers took shots at passing trucks. Mines cratered roads, disabling lead vehicles and trapping convoys in place. Small ambushes harassed drivers, forcing them to abandon vehicles and scatter. The Transportation Corps was bleeding personnel and equipment, and there was no clear solution. Military police were responsible for convoy security, but they simply didn't have the manpower or equipment to guard hundreds of miles of highway. Combat units controlled checkpoints at bridges and key intersections, able to respond as reaction forces, but they couldn't patrol the entire road network. For most of the journey, transportation units were on their own. Initially, they tried using armed jeeps, M151 quarter-ton utility vehicles nicknamed mutts. These little vehicles, descendants of the World War II Jeep, were tough and reliable. Mount an M60 machine gun on a pedestal, add a crew of 2 or 3 soldiers, and you had mobile firepower. It was better than nothing. But against determined attackers with recoilless rifles, RPGs, and automatic weapons, the Jeeps were pathetically inadequate. Thin sheet metal offered no protection. The crews were completely exposed. When an ambush erupted, Jeep crews often became the first casualties, targets eliminated before they could effectively return fire. The September 2nd ambush proved what everyone in the Transportation Corps already knew. The current security measures were failing. 7 dead, 17 wounded, 34 trucks destroyed or damaged. It could have been worse. It nearly was worse. If not for the fortuitous proximity of 1st Cavalry Division infantry and the arrival of helicopter gunships, the casualty count would have been catastrophic. Within a week of the ambush, Lieutenant General Stanley R. Larson, commander of I Field Force Vietnam, held an informal meeting at the 1st Cavalry Division's headquarters in An Khê. This wasn't about assigning blame. It was about finding solutions before more American soldiers died on roads that were becoming highways of death. Everyone agreed the situation was untenable. The 1st Cavalry Division had most of its units in the field conducting operations. They couldn't spare troops to guard roads. Instead, the 4th Infantry Division, mechanized at Pleiku, was ordered to establish checkpoints along Route 19, tanks and armored personnel carriers positioned at bridges, culverts, and likely ambush sites. It helped, but it wasn't enough. The real solution came from the bottom up, from the soldiers who faced the threat every single day. If official channels couldn't provide adequate protection, they would create their own. The evolution began simply. Soldiers of the 8th Transportation Group started reinforcing their cargo trucks with whatever materials they could find. Sandbags first, cheap, readily available, and they stopped bullets. At least, they stopped small arms fire at longer ranges. Wood planks backed the sandbags, creating walls around the truck beds. Mount a couple M60 machine guns, the only weapons officially authorized, and you had something that resembled protection. The M35 2.5-ton truck, the famous Deuce and a Half, became the first platform. This workhorse vehicle had served since World War II, reliable and versatile. Soldiers removed the canvas covers from the cargo beds and built crude gun boxes, elevated platforms where gunners could stand and operate their weapons. The trucks still carried cargo, but now they also carried protection for the convoy. The concept worked, kind of. The first convoy to field these improvised gun trucks saw immediate results. When ambushed, instead of all vehicles stopping and crews scattering, the gun trucks drove forward into the kill zone, gunners blazing away with their M60s. The unexpected aggression disrupted enemy plans. Attackers expected their victims to freeze, to panic, to become stationary targets. Instead, they faced vehicles charging toward them, machine guns pouring out suppressive fire. But the early designs had serious problems. Sandbags seemed brilliant in theory. In practice, they were a maintenance nightmare. Vietnam has two seasons, wet and dry. During monsoons, the sandbags absorbed water like sponges, becoming waterlogged masses that nearly doubled the weight. A 2.5-ton truck loaded with wet sandbags became a 2.5-ton truck carrying 3 tons of mud. Engines strained, transmissions overheated, fuel consumption skyrocketed. Trucks broke down at alarming rates, unable to handle the additional weight they were never designed to carry. Worse, the wooden planks backing the sandbags offered virtually no protection against anything larger than pistol rounds. AK-47 bullets at close range punched through wood and sand like they weren't there. The Transportation Corps kept improvising. They switched to the M54 5-ton cargo truck, a larger platform with a more powerful engine and heavier suspension designed to handle serious loads. The International Harvester-designed M54 had entered service in the early 1950s. It was tough, simple, and powerful enough to haul 5 tons of cargo off-road. More importantly, it could handle the weight of armor plating. Soldiers began scrounging for steel. Scrap yards became treasure troves. Destroyed trucks yielded metal that could be cut, shaped, and welded into armor plates. M113 armored personnel carriers, damaged beyond repair, were cannibalized, their hulls cut up and repurposed. Sheet steel from construction sites, steel plates from engineering units, aircraft armor from downed helicopters, anything that could stop a bullet found its way onto gun trucks. The acquisition methods were creative, ranging from official requisition to unofficial midnight supply operations. If a unit needed something and the Army wouldn't provide it, soldiers found other ways. Trading was common. Cases of beer or cartons of cigarettes exchanged for steel plates or gun mounts. Borrowing from other services, particularly the Air Force, yielded fruit. Many gun truck crews developed relationships with Air Force personnel at nearby bases who often had better access to materials and equipment. Outright theft, while never officially acknowledged, certainly occurred when necessity demanded it. Within months, the character of gun trucks transformed dramatically. The olive-drab cargo trucks disappeared, replaced by matte black behemoths that looked like they'd rolled out of a fever dream. Paint was psychological warfare as much as camouflage. Olive drab said military logistics vehicle. Black said, "Don't mess with us." The crews painted names on their trucks in huge, bold letters visible from hundreds of yards away. Eve of Destruction took its name from Barry Maguire's 1965 protest song. Brutus announced its brutal intentions. The untouchable was a challenge and a promise. Satisfaction, Cold Sweat, Iron Butterfly, Pandemonium, Deuces Wild, names drawn from rock and roll, popular culture, and dark humor. Every truck had personality, and that personality was aggressive. The armor evolved rapidly through trial and error. First-generation designs bolted steel plates to the outside of the truck bed, creating a 4-sided gun box. Better than sandbags, but still vulnerable to RPGs and recoilless rifle rounds. The shaped charge warheads used in anti-tank weapons could punch through single steel plates easily. Second-generation designs added an inner steel wall, creating a space between the outer and inner armor layers. This spacing was critical. When a shaped charge warhead detonated against the outer wall, its jet of molten metal dissipated across the air gap before reaching the inner wall. Spaced armor, the same principle used on tanks, exponentially increased survivability. Some crews filled the gap with additional sandbags or dirt, further absorbing blast energy. Third-generation designs mounted the armor inside the truck bed rather than outside, protecting the structural integrity of the vehicle itself. This also lowered the center of gravity slightly, improving handling on the treacherous mountain roads. Some units mounted entire M113 armored personnel carrier hulls onto the beds of 5-ton trucks, creating gun trucks with all-around protection. The M113's aluminum armor wasn't particularly thick, but it was designed to stop small arms fire and shell fragments. Mounted on a truck chassis, these hybrids combined mobility, firepower, and protection in ways that made them genuinely formidable. The weapon systems evolved just as rapidly. M60 machine guns were officially authorized, but the Transportation Corps had bigger ambitions. The M2 Browning 50 caliber heavy machine gun became the weapon of choice. Designed by John Moses Browning in the closing days of World War I, the Ma Deuce was a proven man-killer and light vehicle destroyer. Its half-inch bullets could penetrate light armor, destroy vehicles, cut down trees, and reach out to effective ranges exceeding a mile. Gun trucks typically mounted M2s in several configurations, one over the cab facing forward, giving the truck commander devastating firepower against threats ahead. Two or more in the gun box covering the flanks, and rear on flexible mounts that allowed gunners to engage targets at any angle. The ammunition load was staggering, 3,000 to 4,000 rounds per truck, stored in steel ammunition cans and fed through electrically powered boost systems that prevented jams during violent evasive maneuvers. The Quad 50 setup became the ultimate expression of gun truck firepower. Originally developed during World War I as the M45 Maxim mount for anti-aircraft defense, the Quad 50 synchronized 4 M2 Browning machine guns, electrically controlled so they all fired together. The system had proven devastating against German and Japanese aircraft. In Korea, against Chinese human wave attacks, it earned the nickname the Meat Chopper. In Vietnam, mounted on M54 or M55 gun trucks, the Quad 50 was apocalyptic. Combined rate of fire, 2,000 rounds per minute. That's 33 half-inch bullets every second, creating a wall of lead and steel that could saw through vegetation, buildings, and vehicles with terrifying efficiency. The M55 system included the mount and a dedicated trailer, but many gun trucks mounted just the Quad 50 turret directly in the cargo bed, powered by upgraded generators. Then there was the minigun. The General Electric M134 minigun represented the cutting edge of rotary cannon technology. 6 rotating barrels, electrically driven, chambered for 7.62 mm NATO ammunition. Rate of fire selectable from 2,000 to 6,000 rounds per minute. At maximum rate, the minigun fired 100 rounds every second. The sound wasn't like a machine gun. It was a continuous roar, like tearing fabric amplified 1,000 times. The muzzle flash was a fireball 3 feet long. Gunners firing the weapon couldn't see their targets through the fire and smoke. They aimed generally and let the volume of fire do the rest. Mounting a minigun on a gun truck required significant modifications. The weapon's power requirements demanded upgraded electrical systems. The ammunition consumption was so high that trucks carrying miniguns often sacrificed other weapons to carry enough 7.62 mm belts. But the psychological impact was worth it. Enemy soldiers who survived minigun fire described it as facing the finger of God, an invisible force that obliterated everything in its path. Crews also carried M79 grenade launchers, M16 rifles, and personal weapons. Some trucks mounted M60 machine guns alongside heavier weapons, creating layered firepower that could engage targets at various ranges simultaneously. The philosophy was simple: overwhelming firepower applied instantly and violently. Don't give the enemy time to aim. Don't give them time to think. Hit them so hard and fast that their only option is retreat or death. A typical gun truck crew consisted of 4 or 5 men. The driver, responsible for keeping the truck moving no matter what. The truck commander, usually a non-commissioned officer, making tactical decisions and coordinating with other vehicles. 2 to 3 gunners, operating the various weapons. Sometimes a grenadier, armed with an M79, riding up front to engage bunkers or enemy positions with high explosive rounds. These crews developed bonds that went beyond typical military camaraderie. They lived together, fought together, maintained their trucks together. Each gun truck became a home and a weapon, decorated with personal touches, photos, graffiti, kill markings. The artwork varied from basic to elaborate. Some trucks featured simple names and unit designations. Others displayed intricate murals, cartoon characters, pin-up girls, skulls, flames, and symbols drawn from pop culture and personal experience. The truck named Brutus became legendary within the 359th Transportation Company. Originally crewed by soldiers who died or were wounded in a November 1970 attack when the truck was hit by rockets or mortars, Brutus was inherited by 4 friends who had helped maintain her: Larry Gilbert Dahl, Richard Bond, Ronald Mallory, and Charles Heuser. They repaired the damage, repainted her, and swore that the enemy would see no signs of weakness. On February 23, 1971, their promise would be tested. The evolution of tactics paralleled the evolution of vehicles. Initially, gun trucks simply accompanied convoys, providing mobile firepower. When an ambush erupted, they would engage targets, while cargo trucks fled or sought cover. This reactive approach saved lives, but didn't fundamentally change the dynamic. Then someone had a revolutionary idea: drive into the kill zone. In standard ambush tactics, the attacker chooses terrain carefully, creating a killing zone where targets are trapped, slowed, or channeled. The ambusher's advantage is complete surprise combined with advantageous position. Victims are expected to freeze, scatter, or attempt to flee, becoming easier targets as confusion and panic spread. Gun trucks turned this formula on its head. When an ambush began, instead of stopping or retreating, gun truck drivers hit the accelerator and drove directly toward the enemy fire. Gunners opened up with everything they had, saturating suspected enemy positions with machine gun fire before the attackers could effectively engage. The shock of vehicles charging toward them, guns blazing, disrupted enemy plans and morale. Ambushers became the ambushed. This aggressive response required extraordinary courage. Natural instinct screams to take cover, to get away from incoming fire. Gun truck crews trained themselves to override that instinct, to drive into the teeth of danger. It was the convoy security equivalent of charging a machine gun nest, terrifying and effective. Convoys were reorganized around gun trucks. The standard ratio became 1 gun truck for every 10 cargo vehicles. In a typical 100-truck convoy, 10 gun trucks would be distributed throughout the column. Lead gun truck, usually heavily armed and armored, took point, scouting ahead and absorbing the first contact. Gun trucks throughout the convoy provided overlapping fields of fire. Trail gun truck, equally powerful, protected against pursuit and rear ambush. Communication was critical. Radio networks allowed gun truck commanders to coordinate responses instantly. If the lead truck spotted suspicious activity, it alerted the entire convoy. If any section came under fire, gun trucks from other areas could respond within minutes, converging on the ambush site and bringing overwhelming firepower to bear. Night convoys added another layer of complexity and danger. Driving Route 19 in daylight was hazardous enough. At night, with headlights making perfect targets and darkness concealing every potential ambush site, it was nearly suicidal. But operational necessity sometimes demanded it. Gun trucks developed specialized equipment for night operations: infrared lights, searchlights, flares. Some crews preferred running completely dark, using moonlight and memorized terrain features to navigate. The first major validation of gun truck tactics came on November 24, 1967, in Ambush Alley. A convoy equipped with the new gun trucks, steel armor replacing sandbags, 50 caliber machine guns replacing M60s, ran into a prepared ambush. The Viet Cong expected another turkey shoot like September 2nd. Instead, they encountered a meat grinder. The gun trucks drove into the kill zone firing. The volume of fire was unprecedented. 50 caliber bullets tore through vegetation, bunkers, and human bodies with equal ease. The enemy had prepared 50 ambush positions. Gun truck crews systematically destroyed them, walking fire across the tree line like a steel curtain. The battle lasted less than 15 minutes. The convoy lost 6 cargo trucks and 4 gun trucks damaged or destroyed. Several drivers were killed or wounded. But the Viet Cong lost 41 soldiers, confirmed killed, with unknown additional casualties dragged away. More importantly, the enemy was forced to withdraw before accomplishing their objective. The convoy survived. Cargo reached its destination. The gun trucks had proven themselves in the most brutal way possible. Word spread through the Central Highlands like wildfire. Among American transportation units, gun trucks became symbols of defiant resistance. Crews volunteered for gun truck duty despite, or perhaps because of, the inherent danger. Among Vietnamese civilians and ARVN forces, gun trucks became objects of respect and curiosity. Among the Viet Cong and NVA, gun trucks became objects of fear. Enemy intelligence reports began noting the black trucks with heavy weapons. Ambush planning started accounting for them. Some enemy units avoided convoys they knew included gun trucks seeking softer targets. Others tried developing tactics specifically to neutralize gun trucks, focusing RPG and recoilless rifle fire on the armored vehicles first, attempting to disable them before they could respond. Neither approach worked particularly well. Gun trucks proved extraordinarily difficult to disable. The armor could withstand multiple hits from small arms, machine guns, and even some anti-tank weapons. The powerful engines kept running despite battle damage. The redundant systems, backup controls, doubled cables, independent weapons, meant that destroying one component didn't neutralize the vehicle. Crews reported bringing trucks home with dozens or even hundreds of bullet holes, engines shot through, control systems partially severed, yet the vehicles still functioned well enough to reach safety. This survivability was no accident. American engineering philosophy emphasized overbuilding. The M54 truck's components were designed with safety margins that military planners considered excessive. The frame could support 3 times its rated load without failing. The engine could operate with cylinders destroyed. The drivetrain could function with damaged components. This inherent toughness, combined with field modifications and armor, created vehicles that could absorb punishment that would obliterate thinner-skinned machines. The strategic impact extended beyond individual convoy security. Gun trucks forced the enemy to commit more resources to attacks, knowing that ambushes now faced serious opposition. This increased the risk for attackers and decreased their effectiveness. Some enemy units calculating that attacking hardened convoys wasn't worth the casualties, shifted to other targets or tactics. This was exactly what American planners wanted, forcing the enemy into less advantageous situations. But the cost was real. Gun truck crews faced danger every day they went out. The violence was intimate and brutal. Ambushes happened at ranges measured in dozens of yards, close enough to see enemy soldiers' faces as you killed them or they tried to kill you. The psychological toll was heavy. Drivers, gunners, and commanders who survived multiple tours often struggled with what they had seen and done. The medals told part of the story. Transportation companies, normally rear echelon units with few combat decorations, began receiving Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars, Silver Stars at rates comparable to infantry units. 2 acts of heroism would result in the highest military decoration America can bestow, the Medal of Honor. Specialist Dallas Mullins of the 404th Transportation Company was manning his gun truck when the convoy came under attack. The driver was hit immediately, wounded and unable to control the vehicle. The truck stalled in the center of the enemy kill zone, a stationary target surrounded by small arms fire. Mullins, though wounded twice in the arm and once in the leg, came to the driver's aid. Under continuous fire, bleeding from multiple wounds, he maneuvered the truck out of the kill zone and evacuated the injured driver. For his selfless actions, he received the Silver Star Medal. Specialist 4th Class Larry Gilbert Dahl's story epitomized the courage and sacrifice of gun truck crews. Born June 10, 1949 in Oregon City, Oregon, Larry Dahl grew up in Portland. He attended Franklin High School, ran track, met and married his wife Michelle, and worked at Boeing before enlisting in the Army on September 5, 1969. He received training at Fort Lewis and Fort Benning, becoming a heavy vehicle driver. He requested combat duty in Vietnam 3 times before finally receiving orders in June 1970. Assigned to the 359th Transportation Company, 27th Transportation Battalion, 8th Transportation Group, Dahl became part of Brutus's backup crew. He and 3 friends, Richard Bond, Ronald Mallory, and Charles Husser, maintained the gun truck and waited for their chance to crew her. That chance came in November 1970, when the original crew was killed or wounded. The 4 friends took over Brutus, repairing and repainting her. Dahl became the minigun operator on February 23, 1971, a fuel convoy escorted by gun. Trucks from the 545th Transportation Company was ambushed as it crossed the top of Unheard Pass. The attack was massive, a significantly large enemy force with prepared positions and heavy weapons. The ambush had been ongoing for more than 30 minutes when the 359th Transportation Company convoy at the bottom of the pass heard the radio calls. The 545th convoy needed help. 3 359th gun trucks, Brutus, the Untouchable, and the Misfits, plus gun jeep Lil Brutus, raced up the mountain pass into the kill zone. Driver Ronald Mallory drove Brutus around hairpin turns at speeds that defied safety, engine roaring as they climbed toward the sound of battle. The gun truck crews in the 545th convoy heard the distinctive roar of Brutus's minigun before they saw the truck. Morale surged. Reinforcements had arrived. Mallory pulled Brutus right next to a burning fuel tanker. Protocol was to position near the most dangerous elements, protecting them with the gun truck's armor and firepower. The minigun opened up, a continuous scream of fire that tore through enemy positions like tissue paper. The fight continued for another 15 minutes before subsiding. Thinking it was over, Brutus and the Misfits decided to return to their convoy. Mallory backed his truck up to turn around. 3 or 4 enemy soldiers hidden in positions that hadn't revealed themselves during the main battle, chose that moment to attack. They rushed the truck and tossed a hand grenade into the gun box. Time compressed. The grenade bounced once, twice, settling among the ammunition cans and crew members. Specialist Dale, manning his position near the minigun, saw it immediately. In that instant, he understood the mathematics perfectly. The grenade would explode in seconds. The confined space would turn fragments into shrapnel storm. Everyone in the gun box would die or be catastrophically wounded. He shouted a warning, "Grenade!" and threw himself directly onto the explosive device. The blast was muffled by his body. Specialist Dahl absorbed the full force of the explosion. His sacrifice saved Sergeant Hector Diaz, Charles Huser, and Ronald Mallory. They survived. He did not. Larry Gilbert Dahl was 21 years old. His widow, Michelle, received his Medal of Honor on August 8, 1974, in a ceremony at Blair House in Washington, D.C. Vice President Gerald Ford presented the award. Hours later, Ford would become president when Richard Nixon resigned. Their 6-year-old son, Michael, Dahl's mother, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters attended the ceremony. The Medal of Honor citation reads, "Specialist 4-Class Dahl distinguished himself by conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity while serving as a machine gunner on a gun truck near An Khe, Binh Dinh Province." The gun truck in which Specialist 4-Class Dahl was riding was sent with 2 other gun trucks to assist in the defense of a convoy that had been ambushed by an enemy force. The gun trucks entered the battle zone and engaged. The attacking enemy troops, with a heavy volume of machine gun fire, causing a large number of casualties. After a brief period of intense fighting, the attack subsided. As the gun trucks were preparing to return to their normal escort duties, an enemy hand grenade was thrown into the truck in which Specialist 4-Class Dahl was riding. Instantly realizing the great danger, Specialist 4-Class Dahl called a warning to his companions and threw himself directly onto the grenade. Through his indomitable courage, complete disregard for his safety, and profound concern for his fellow soldiers, Specialist 4-Class Dahl saved the lives of the other members of the truck crew while sacrificing his own. In January 1975, a headquarters building at Fort Eustis, Virginia, was named in his honor. In October 1998, the United States Navy cargo ship USNS Dahl was launched, sponsored by Michelle Dale Steenson, who christened the vessel. Larry Dahl became one of only 4 soldiers from the Transportation Corps ever to receive the Medal of Honor. His story, and the story of gun truck crews like him, represented something fundamental about the American soldier. Given impossible situations, they don't surrender. They improvise, adapt, overcome. The gun trucks embodied this spirit completely. By 1970, approximately 300 to 400 gun trucks operated throughout South Vietnam. Each unit developed variations based on available resources, specific threats, and crew preferences. Engineer companies created gun trucks to escort their equipment. Artillery units built armed trucks for convoy security. Even military police, initially skeptical of the improvised vehicles, eventually embraced the concept. The standardization efforts came late. In October 1968, factory-made hardening kits began arriving from the United States. These official packages included steel armor panels designed to specific ballistic standards, mounting hardware, and installation instructions. They represented the Army's formal acknowledgement that gun trucks weren't a temporary field expedient, but a legitimate security requirement. Some crews welcomed the factory kits. Others preferred their hand-built modifications, arguing that custom armor designed for specific trucks and threats worked better than one-size-fits-all solutions. The debate became moot as the war wound down. By 1972, the last American truck company operating in Vietnam was inactivated. The gun trucks, their mission complete, faced an uncertain future. Senior officers had always viewed 5-ton gun trucks as temporary solutions. The official plan called for replacing them with Cadillac Gauge Commando V100 armored cars, purpose-built security vehicles with armor, weapons, and mobility designed from the ground up for convoy escort. V100s began arriving in Vietnam in 1967. The gun truck crews were not impressed. The V100 looked formidable on paper: four-wheel drive, amphibious capability, turret-mounted weapons, and armor rated to stop, 7.62 mm bullets and shell fragments. In practice, it was a death trap. If armor was penetrated by RPGs, recoilless rifle rounds, or heavy machine gun fire, the V100's interior became a killing box. Fragments ricocheted inside the confined space, wounding everyone inside. The powertrain, particularly the transmission, proved unreliable under combat conditions. V100s broke down regularly, stranding crews in hostile territory. Most critically, V100 crews couldn't maintain their vehicles in the field. Gun truck crews were truck drivers and mechanics. They understood their vehicles intimately. When something broke, they fixed it with whatever tools and parts were available. V100s required specialized training and parts that weren't readily available in forward areas. Military police units, primary operators of the V100, learned to hate the vehicles despite their official endorsement. By 1970, it became obvious to everyone except the military police bureaucracy that gun trucks were superior for convoy security. They remained in service until the last American transportation units left Vietnam in 1972. With the end of the war, most gun trucks were scrapped or returned to cargo-carrying configuration. The Army saw no peacetime role for improvised armored vehicles. The institutional memory of what these trucks represented, soldier innovation, combat effectiveness, tactical revolution, was largely lost as Vietnam veterans left service and new soldiers never learned the lessons written in steel and blood on Route 19. One gun truck survived intact. Captain Donald K. Voigt Ritter, commanding officer of the 523rd Transportation Company, sent a formal request on May 31, 1971, to Brigadier General Alton G. Post, officer in charge of all logistics for U.S. Army Vietnam. Voigt Ritter asked that gun truck Eve of Destruction be shipped back to the United States to preserve this historic vehicle. Eve of Destruction represented the combat-proven design: double-walled spaced armor, 4 50 caliber machine guns, double-armored slanted cab doors, and hinged armored windshield with bullet-resistant vision blocks. Built on an M54 5-ton 6x6 truck chassis, she had seen extensive combat throughout the Central Highlands, surviving ambushes that destroyed lesser vehicles. The request was approved. On June 11, 1971, Eve of Destruction rolled toward Quy Nhon Port, destined for shipment to the United States. Photographs captured her on that journey. Overhead shots showing the massive black truck with its distinctive armor and weapons, a rolling piece of military history. Today, Eve of Destruction is displayed in a Vietnam-themed diorama at the Army Transportation Museum at Fort Eustis, Virginia. She is the museum's crown jewel, positioned near the back, so visitors pass other exhibits on their way to see her. Museum director Alicia Hamel reports that some visitors come specifically to see Eve of Destruction, often veterans who served with gun trucks and wanted to show their children and grandchildren what they experienced. The truck sits on supports to keep her tires inflated, looking after decades of display. The black paint is faded, but still menacing. The armor shows dents and scrapes from near misses and glancing hits. The gun mounts are empty now, weapons removed long ago, but you can still see where the 50 caliber machine guns were positioned. The name, Eve of Destruction, remains painted in bold white letters on her side, visible from across the museum floor. She is a monument to American ingenuity and courage under fire. A reminder that sometimes the most effective weapons aren't designed by engineers, but by soldiers who refuse to accept death as inevitable. The legacy of Vietnam gun trucks extended far beyond their service years. The tactical lessons, the mechanical innovations, the psychological insights, all of this knowledge was documented, analyzed, and eventually incorporated into military doctrine. Transportation Corps historians, particularly Richard E. Kilblain, preserved gun truck history through extensive research, interviews with veterans, and published works that ensured future generations could learn from Vietnam experiences. When American forces returned to combat in Iraq in 2003, they faced strikingly similar challenges. Insurgents ambushed supply convoys with improvised explosive devices, small arms fire, and RPGs. Coalition vehicles, designed for conventional warfare in Europe, proved vulnerable to asymmetric attacks on supply routes between bases. The vulnerability became tragically apparent on March 23, 2003, when a maintenance convoy from the 507th Maintenance Company was ambushed in Nasiriyah. 11 soldiers died, and 5 were captured, including Private First Class Jessica Lynch. The ambush shocked American commanders who had assumed supply routes through allegedly secured areas were safe. As insurgent attacks escalated through 2003, American soldiers began improvising protection for their vehicles, using methods that would have been instantly familiar to Vietnam veterans. Sandbags on floorboards to protect against mines, plywood and scrap metal bolted to doors and truck beds, machine guns mounted on pedestals, steel plates salvaged from damaged vehicles. Hillbilly armor, soldiers called it, the same term used 40 years earlier in Vietnam. The improvisations quickly became a political issue. The Bush administration faced criticism for sending troops to fight without adequate equipment. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld's infamous response to a soldier's question, "You go to war with the army you have, not the army you might want," inflamed public opinion and highlighted the equipment shortages. But for soldiers on the ground, politics mattered less than survival. Transportation units in Iraq began converting their vehicles into gun trucks, using the same principles, sometimes even the same techniques, as their Vietnam predecessors. The primary platforms were M939 5-ton trucks and HMMWVs, with some units converting palletized load system vehicles because fully loaded PLSs couldn't keep pace with convoys and became easy targets. By 2004, gun trucks were again standard convoy security vehicles. The improvements came faster than in Vietnam, aided by institutional memory and modern communications. Vietnam veterans, now in their 50s and 60s, provided consulting services to units deploying to Iraq. Some traveled to military bases to lecture on convoy security tactics. Others provided written documentation, after-action reports, tactical manuals, lessons learned that had been preserved in archives. Representative Duncan Hunter, Republican from California and chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, pushed for standardized gun truck production despite resistance from some Army senior officers. Working with Vietnam veterans and engineers at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Hunter's team developed the Hunter Box, a standardized armored box intended for 5-ton trucks. The Hunter Box design incorporated high-grade steel plating, fiberglass reinforcement, and ballistic glass. Armament consisted of 2 to 4 heavy machine guns, typically M250 caliber Brownings or M240 7.62 mm machine guns. The first prototype completed in March 2004, shipped to Iraq in July 2004. Production began slowly, with 35 Hunter boxes in service by July 2005. Eventually, purpose-built mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles replaced improvised gun trucks as MRAP production ramped up in 2007-2008. These factory-built vehicles incorporated lessons from decades of convoy security operations, featuring V-shaped hulls to deflect blast energy, heavy armor protection, powerful engines, and integrated weapons systems. But for the critical years of 2003-2007, improvised gun trucks, direct descendants of Vietnam's Black Monsters, protected American supply convoys in Iraq and Afghanistan. The tactical doctrine, the aggressive response to ambush, the willingness to drive into kill zones while guns blazed, all of it traced directly back to Route 19, NK Pass, Ambush Alley, and the young soldiers who refused to be victims. The parallels were so exact that veterans from both conflicts recognized the connection immediately. A Transportation Corps soldier who had crewed a gun truck on Route 19 in 1970 could look at photographs from Iraq in 2004 and see his own experience reflected back at him across 34 years. Different vehicles, different weapons, different enemies, but the same fundamental truth. When official channels fail to provide protection, American soldiers will create their own. The gun truck legacy influenced more than just tactics and equipment. It changed how the military thought about soldier initiative and field modifications. In previous wars, unauthorized modifications to military equipment were generally forbidden. Vehicles and weapons were to be used as designed, with changes requiring official approval through proper channels. Vietnam gun trucks proved that soldiers in combat understand their needs better than planners thousands of miles away. The men driving Route 19 knew what protection they needed and what weapons would be effective. Their improvised solutions, born from desperation and refined through trial and error, ultimately proved superior to official alternatives like the V-100. This lesson influenced military culture profoundly. Modern American military doctrine explicitly acknowledges that soldiers must be empowered to adapt equipment and tactics to specific threats. Rapid fielding initiatives allow combat-tested improvements to be quickly incorporated into standard equipment. After-action reports from junior soldiers carry more weight in planning processes. The institutional arrogance that once assumed generals and engineers always knew best has been replaced by recognition that lance corporals and specialists fighting every day possess wisdom that can't be found in staff colleges. The gun trucks also represented something fundamental about American military character: the marriage of industrial capacity and individual initiative. The Transportation Corps didn't wait for Pentagon bureaucracy to solve their problems. They took available materials, trucks, steel, weapons, and combined them into something new. The results weren't elegant or sophisticated. Gun trucks were brutal, ugly, effective. They embodied American pragmatism. If it works, use it. If it doesn't work, fix it. If you can't fix it, build something better. This cultural trait, this willingness to improvise and innovate under pressure, has defined American military effectiveness across conflicts. From Revolutionary War militias adapting European tactics to American terrain, to World War II, Seabees building bases on Pacific islands, to Special Forces operators modifying weapons and equipment in Afghanistan, the pattern repeats. Give American soldiers a problem, and they'll find a solution. The gun trucks of Vietnam remain powerful symbols of this tradition. They weren't authorized, weren't planned, weren't supposed to exist, but they did exist, created by teenage soldiers who understood that survival required innovation. Their names, Brutus, Eve of Destruction, the Untouchable, became legends whispered in motor pools and remembered in reunions decades later. Veterans who served on gun trucks formed associations to preserve the memory of their service. The 359th Transportation Company Association, the 523rd Transportation Company veterans, and others meet regularly, sharing stories and honoring fallen comrades. Sammy Say, a veteran of the 523rd, built a replica of his gun truck, the Ace of Spades, working for a year to recreate every detail with meticulous accuracy. When completed, his entire crew from Vietnam, men who hadn't seen each other in years, assembled and rode the truck 700 miles to a reunion in Branson, Missouri. Guns, mounted with gunners in position, firing pins removed but otherwise authentic. The journey was symbolic. These men, scattered across America, had shared experiences that civilians couldn't fully understand. The terror of ambushes, the adrenaline of combat, the grief of losing friends, the pride of protecting their fellow soldiers. For one weekend, riding in their old positions on a gun truck rolling down Interstate 40, they were young again, brothers in arms defending convoys through hostile territory. Such reunions became common as gun truck veterans aged. Men in their 60s and 70s would gather at transportation museums, VFW halls, or online forums, sharing photographs and memories. They would debate details: which model machine gun was mounted on which truck, what colors were used in different periods, which units had the heaviest armor. These discussions preserved technical knowledge, but also served deeper purposes, allowing veterans to process experiences and find meaning in what they had endured. The children and grandchildren of gun truck veterans inherited these stories. Some followed their fathers into military service, often joining transportation units to honor family tradition. Others became historians, researchers, or modelers, preserving gun truck history through different mediums. The gun truck community extended across generations, bound by respect for what these vehicles represented. Model companies recognized the interest. Scale model kits of gun trucks appeared, allowing hobbyists to build accurate replicas of Eve of Destruction, Brutus, and other named trucks. These kits became popular among military modelers and veterans alike. Building a gun truck model became an act of remembrance, each tiny armor plate and machine gun carefully glued in place, a tribute to soldiers who built the real things under far more difficult circumstances. Authors and filmmakers documented gun truck history through books, documentaries, and articles. The Smithsonian Channel produced Gun Trucks of Vietnam, featuring Eve of Destruction and interviews with veterans. Books like Timothy J. Kuta's Gun Trucks and James Lyle's The Hard Ride, Vietnam Gun Trucks series provided comprehensive technical and historical information. These works ensured that gun truck history wouldn't be forgotten as veterans aged and memories faded. Academic interest followed. Military historians recognized gun trucks as important innovations in convoy security doctrine. Studies analyzed their tactical effectiveness, mechanical evolution, and cultural significance. Papers presented at professional conferences examined how field modifications influenced procurement policy and equipment design. Gun trucks became case studies taught at military schools, examples of adaptive problem-solving under combat conditions. The 8th Transportation Group, which bore the heaviest burden on Route 19 and pioneered gun truck development, received special recognition. The unit was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for Extraordinary Heroism, a rare honor for transportation units. It was also the only transportation group in Vietnam to receive the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry, acknowledging their contribution to defending South Vietnam. The individual awards tell the story in personal terms. Bronze Stars for valor, given to soldiers who aggressively engaged enemy forces. Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat. Reminder that gun truck crews bled and died like infantry. Silver Stars and Distinguished Service Crosses for extraordinary heroism above and beyond normal duty. And 2 Medals of Honor, Specialist Dallas Mullins and Specialist for Larry Dayol, representing sacrifice and courage at the highest level. These medals weren't given for rear echelon service. Transportation companies weren't supposed to be combat units. They were supposed to haul cargo, maintain vehicles, and support combat forces. But in Vietnam, the nature of guerrilla warfare meant no rear area was safe. Every convoy became a combat mission. Every day driving Route 19 meant facing possible ambush and death. The gun truck crews accepted this reality and fought back with everything they had. The statistics from gun truck operations remain impressive. On November 24, 1967, gun trucks engaged enemy forces in Ambush Alley, killing 41 confirmed Viet Cong while losing 6 cargo trucks and 4 gun trucks damaged. The kill ratio demonstrated the effectiveness of aggressive tactics combined with heavy firepower. Enemy forces, expecting easy targets, encountered instead a wall of steel and lead that destroyed their positions and forced their withdrawal. Throughout the remaining years of American ground combat in Vietnam, gun trucks maintained their effectiveness. Convoy losses decreased as gun truck designs improved and crews gained experience. Enemy ambushes became less frequent and less successful as the cost of attacking hardened convoys exceeded the benefits. Some enemy units avoided convoys entirely, seeking softer targets elsewhere. This deterrent effect, making attacks so costly that enemies avoid them, represented ultimate success. The goal wasn't to kill enemies, but to protect convoys. If enemies chose not to attack because gun trucks made ambushes suicidal, the mission was accomplished without firing a shot. Every convoy that reached its destination, every soldier who survived to return home, justified the improvised armor and mounted weapons. But the cost was real. Gun truck crews who survived often carried psychological scars. The violence was intimate. Close-range firefights where you saw men die, where bullets passed close enough to feel the shock wave, where the distinction between life and death came down to inches and milliseconds. Some veterans struggled with PTSD, nightmares, survivor's guilt. Why did they survive when friends died? What did it mean that they had killed, had seen such terrible things? The reunions and associations served therapeutic purposes as well as historical ones. Talking with men who shared the experience helped veterans process trauma. Understanding that others felt the same guilt, the same nightmares, the same complicated emotions about their service, this shared understanding brought healing that no therapist who hadn't been there could provide. Some veterans found purpose in preserving gun truck history, by teaching future soldiers, by consulting on convoy security, by documenting their experiences. They transformed their trauma into valuable knowledge that could save lives. This gave meaning to what they had endured. Their sacrifice wasn't just for Vietnam, it was for every future convoy, every future soldier who might face similar threats. The transformation from laughingstock to legend happened remarkably quickly. In April 1967, Transportation units were soft targets, inadequately defended, and frequently ambushed. By late 1968, 18 months later, gun trucks had become symbols of American firepower and determination. The change wasn't gradual, it was revolutionary, compressed into a period measured in months rather than years. The enemy noticed. Captured documents and post-war interviews with former Viet Cong and NVA soldiers revealed that gun trucks had significant psychological impact. The black trucks with heavy weapons were distinctive, identifiable from long distances. Their presence meant increased risk. Some units received orders to avoid convoys escorted by gun trucks unless circumstances heavily favored attackers. The sound became iconic. The distinctive roar of minigun fire, the heavy thump of .50 caliber machine guns, the continuous rattle of M60s. These sounds carried for miles, announcing that American firepower was present and engaged. Vietnamese civilians learned to recognize the sounds and take cover. Enemy soldiers learned to fear them, knowing that being caught in that wall of fire meant death or horrific wounds. The names painted on gun trucks contributed to psychological warfare. Brutus announced brutal intentions. The untouchable was a challenge. Try to touch us, see what happens. Eve of Destruction referenced the apocalyptic protest song, suggesting that attacking this truck would bring destruction to the attackers. King Cobra invoked a venomous snake, deadly and aggressive. These names weren't random, they were carefully chosen to intimidate and warn. The artwork reinforced the message: skulls, flames, weapons, cartoon characters wielding guns, imagery designed to project aggression and fearlessness. Some trucks displayed kill markings, recording each engagement or confirmed enemy casualty. This wasn't mere bravado. It was calculated intimidation, making the trucks seem invincible, crewed by warriors who had survived numerous battles and would survive many more. The reality matched the image. Gun truck crews were warriors, regardless of their official designation as transportation specialists. They fought in sustained engagements, engaged targets at close range, coordinated tactical responses to complex threats. Their courage under fire equaled that of any infantry unit. Their effectiveness in combat exceeded many purpose-built fighting vehicles. The transformation of perception from just truck drivers to gun truck warriors reflected broader changes in how modern warfare understands combat roles. In World War II, clear lines existed between combat arms and support services. Infantry, armor, and artillery fought. Transportation, quartermaster, and medical services supported. Vietnam blurred these distinctions. When everyone might face combat, everyone became a combatant. Gun trucks epitomized this reality. Soldiers trained as mechanics, and drivers found themselves in sustained firefights, making tactical decisions, operating crew-served weapons under fire. They adapted, learning combat skills that weren't in any manual. They improvised, creating vehicles and tactics that worked despite official doctrine saying it shouldn't. They overcame, surviving and succeeding despite facing experienced enemies on terrain that favored ambush. The lessons extended beyond military applications. Gun trucks demonstrated that innovation often comes from bottom up rather than top down, from users rather than designers, from necessity rather than planning. The Pentagon didn't authorize gun trucks. Soldiers created them anyway because survival demanded it. Official procurement couldn't solve the problem fast enough. Field modifications filled the gap. This pattern appears throughout technological and organizational innovation. Users encountering real-world problems develop workarounds and improvements that designers never anticipated. These field modifications, initially dismissed or discouraged, eventually become standard features when their effectiveness becomes undeniable. Gun trucks followed this trajectory, from unauthorized field expedient to officially recognized security platform. The marriage of industrial resources and soldier initiative created something greater than either component alone. American industrial capacity provided the raw materials: trucks, steel, weapons, ammunition. Soldier initiative transformed these components into effective weapon systems. Neither was sufficient alone. Without trucks and materials, initiative had nothing to work with. Without initiative and ingenuity, materials remained just cargo. This synergy, material abundance meeting human creativity, defined the American way of war in the 20th century. From Sherman tanks being field-modified with additional armor and weapons, to B-17 bombers having extra guns installed by their crews, to modern soldiers adding tactical lights and optics to rifles, the pattern repeats across conflicts and generations. Give American soldiers resources, and they will optimize them for effectiveness. Gun trucks represented this tradition at its finest. Steel came from scrap yards and destroyed vehicles. The weapons came through official channels and unofficial acquisitions. The armor designs came from trial and error, crews learning what worked through brutal experience. The tactics came from necessity, soldiers discovering that driving into kill zones saved more lives than running away. Every element was improvised, adapted, and refined under pressure. The result was a weapon system that influenced military doctrine for decades, that saved countless American lives, that transformed convoy security from a logistical afterthought into a specialized combat role. Gun trucks proved that sometimes the best military equipment isn't designed by engineers or procured through proper channels. Sometimes it's built by soldiers who refuse to die quietly. 40 years after the last gun truck rolled down Route 19, their legacy endures. Every convoy in Iraq and Afghanistan benefited from lessons learned on Vietnamese mountain roads. Every transportation specialist trained in convoy security techniques learned tactics developed by gun truck crews. Every armored vehicle designer incorporated features proven effective by improvised armor in the Central Highlands. And in Fort Eustis, Virginia, eve of destruction stands as permanent testament. Visitors approach her slowly, taking in the massive black truck with its layered armor and empty gun mounts. Some are veterans who served with gun trucks, their eyes distant as they remember friends and battles 4 decades past. Some are active duty soldiers, studying the truck with professional interest, understanding that they might face similar threats. Some are civilians, awed by this brutal machine and the courage it represents. The placard beside Eve of Destruction lists her specifications and service history. But the real story is told by the armor plating, dimpled and scarred by bullets that failed to penetrate, by the gun mounts that once held weapons capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute, by the name painted in defiant white letters, by the simple fact that she survived and returned home when so many didn't. Eve of Destruction is more than a truck. She is a memorial to soldiers who improvised, adapted, and overcame. A reminder that courage and ingenuity can transform logistics vehicles into weapons of war. A symbol of American military character, pragmatic, innovative, overwhelming. She represents the moment when laughter turned to fear, when soft targets became hard killers, when desperate soldiers created something the enemy learned to dread. The Viet Cong laughed at cargo convoys in 1967. By 1968, they weren't laughing anymore. The thunder of gun trucks echoed through the Central Highlands, and that thunder meant death was coming. The transformation was complete. The gun trucks of Vietnam, born from ambush and blood on September 2nd, 1967, had become legends. Black steel and heavy weapons, rolling fortresses crewed by warriors who charged into fire rather than fleeing from it. They saved thousands of American lives. They influenced military tactics for generations. They proved that sometimes the most effective weapons aren't designed by engineers, but by soldiers who refuse to accept death as inevitable. In the end, that's the story of the Vietnam gun trucks. Refusal. Refusal to be victims. Refusal to wait for official solutions. Refusal to die without fighting back. That refusal, forged in blood and steel on the roads of the Central Highlands, created something that changed warfare forever. And somewhere, on roads that have returned to jungle, the ghosts of gun trucks still thunder through Ambush Alley, black monsters bristling with weapons, racing toward the sound of battle. They will never stop. As long as American soldiers face danger on foreign roads, as long as convoys need protection, as long as desperate men must improvise solutions to stay alive, the spirit of the gun trucks endures. The enemy laughed once, they never laughed again. The thunder had spoken, and the road belonged to America.